Happy Friday, one and all. Guys, before we get into checking in on the assignment or any of the new material, by show of hands, how many of you were able to make Michelle Singletary this week? What did you guys think? Any reactions? Tell me more. It was different than you thought it was going to be. She was anything but boring.
No, she was really cool.
When she was going out into the crowd and doing the whole Jennifer Hudson thing, what I really love is budgeting. I thought that was fantastic. Like, all the soul folks in the back were having a good old time. Any other reactions? Yes?
I thought she made it very personal. She told a lot of stories about her family and how she does it, so it's easy to understand it more.
I couldn't believe she actually gave an entire 4-year budget plan to the guy sitting in the back, like, oh, so you got some budget problems, here you go, this is how you're going to solve this. And I thought she was pretty amazing. The thing about her, and I know this is a labor class, this is not a finance class, but I want to see if you agree or disagree. Do you guys spend differently when you're paying in cash than you do with credit? I do. Do you do the same? How is it different when you have cash? Yeah.
You can see your wallet just getting thinner and thinner. And it just kind of, when I get down to like the last dollar, I start really feeling the anguish to hand it over.
I'm with you. I love when people pay me in big bills because, for example, when I get paid in cash, if I get 50 or 100, I don't want to break that. So I'll hang on to that thing as long as I can. Anybody else do that as well? Do you feel that way? Yeah, it's amazing how the physicality of money means something sometimes too. Guys, just a reminder, our next assignment is going to be due next Friday, the 27th. And it's going to be based on the material we're talking about. I'm asking you in your own words to tell me if you think federal employees should be allowed to unionize. Now, the fact of the matter is federal workers are unionized. Most of them are, but it's been a very controversial subject. And the federal government is actually one of the biggest strongholds of unions in the United States in 2019. If you go to FCI Loretto or if you go to anywhere in the federal government, there's a lot of people who are members of unions. So I'm going to ask you, if you would, to give me your opinion and back it up with some sources. Guys, today is a big deal for a lot of labor unions across the country. There's a big statement being made about the labor unions' opinions on climate change. We're actually going to do 2 videos to start off today. One of the companies that was talking about walking off the job today is Amazon. Now, guys, how does Amazon have a climate impact, potentially? It's one of these things, not everybody believes in human impact on global warming, and I support your belief on that either way. How does Amazon potentially have an impact on the environment? Yes?
They carry and distribute a lot of goods at a very fast pace. And I think that's one of the costs of free 2-day shipping is you constantly are moving, constantly have big vehicles traveling all around the United States and the world.
So we got vehicles moving goods and services. Justin, what's another way in which Amazon affects the environment?
How much are they the environment?
Yeah.
Like their warehouses?
For sure, they eat a lot of energy, don't they?
Yeah.
So we got shipping, we got energy being eaten that way. You've got to heat these places. What about packaging, guys? Most of that cardboard that gets shipped with Amazon or the liner inserts, where does that stuff end up? Where does it go? Landfills. It's garbage. You can't recycle styrofoam. And so that's why a lot of people who work for these companies, not just union people, because Amazon's not a union company, but they're walking out of their jobs today to basically bring attention to climate change. We're going to watch 2 quick videos. One is the unions in general and some of the organized labor groups, and the others, and weeks ago, that today would be the day that they would be going out, and about 15,000 of them were going out and taking the day off without pay. A lot of other people, hundreds of thousands of people within Amazon signed a petition stating the same kind of intent. Is this coincidental that the night before the strike that Jeff Bezos makes this announcement? No, it's crazy. So what happened here, guys? Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world. So why would he have made this announcement? Did he have to cave to his people? Did they carry some power here? What do you thought? Yes.
I think he didn't want the public image of the company to be left behind as if they didn't respond in any way, but their workers did. It would kind of feel like upper management was kind of indifferent to this whole issue, while their laborers were still concerned, so it would give their laborers a better image and worsen theirs. So I feel like this is in response to kind of save face in a way.
I agree. I agree. We'll touch more on that. Anybody else have any reaction to this? Yes.
I also think that maybe he's not necessarily addressing their concern because it kind of seemed like he was vague with what he said. But I think that also it was just so that it doesn't disrupt his business because Amazon's known for things like next day or 2-day delivery. So to like uphold the reputation of his company, he wants to do or say anything that will make that happen. So if he can get a lot of those workers that were gonna take the day off to come in, whether he does or doesn't intend to follow through with what he said, it'll for now like uphold his company's reputation.
I think there's a lot to both of what you guys are saying. We're going to tie this all together in a moment. Any other thoughts or reactions? Check this out, guys. Did you notice whenever that announcement came over, the stock ticker, Amazon was going up that day. Now here's my question. We've got 15,000 rank and file members of Amazon who said weeks ago, we're going to not work today. And then you've got Jeff Bezos, the day before these folks are going to get media coverage, going out on a strike, coming out with this big announcement that we're making a commitment to meet Paris climate goals, Paris Accord goals, and we're going to go electric with our shipping, and we're going to get rid of all these emissions. Who's going to get more play in the media? Totally. The richest man in the world saying that Amazon's going to go to electric? This is a big deal. I'd say from a media standpoint, he outmaneuvered the people in his own company. And this is 20 years from now. For example, is anybody going to really hold him account to say on the 19th of September, 2019, this is what you said, Jeff Bezos, and 20 years from now on the 19th, 2040, when this comes out, you know, when I'm watching the next report from my nursing home, I'm going to be yelling at the TV saying, I said he wouldn't live up to his word, nobody else is going to remember. So here's my other question, guys. What kind of a reputation does Amazon have in terms of how they treat their employees? Tell me about that. What is their reputation? Go for it.
Didn't you say, I think in the last class, that they had like a point system where like if you went to the bathroom too long, they would like dock you points, and after a certain amount of points you get fired. So like people would literally like find water bottles filled with like urine because they were too afraid to go to the restroom.
Let's say Tanner and Elliot and Sarah all work for Amazon, and they're all in management positions. Everybody in the company, on an app on their phone, can see their performance evaluations. The equivalent would be if everybody in this room could see everybody else's grades on every assignment. And let's just say we also set it up that only the top 3 people in this class will get A's. How would that change the dynamic of this classroom? EJ, how would that change the dynamic in here? It would be very competitive, and it could potentially turn hostile. In Amazon, that's the way they manage their company. Jeff Bezos is also very famous as saying he does not believe in a work-life balance. If you work for Amazon, you work for Amazon. I had a member of my MBA cohort a few years ago, a student I taught, who was former military and got a management position in Amazon. She said the average workday was 12 to 14 hours. She walked an average of 13 miles a day. And she said the inside joke was you get your ID picture taken on the first day you worked at Amazon. And 6 months later, you compare yourself to your old ID picture to see how much weight you had lost. Because people basically do not get breaks when they're working there. So it is a very tough corporate culture. I think that things like what Jeff did yesterday are also drawing some attention away from his own labor practices. We're going to be good for the environment. Yes?
I think everyone's trying to get realistic with Walmart. Because Walmart, like, even though everyone really likes it, they like greenwash and
And actually, Walmart, Jeff Bezos seems to be anti-worker in general. Who seem to be the targets for Walmart? Is there a particular demographic that Walmart has gotten a bad reputation for? I'll give you a hint. I'm not talking about anything with a Y chromosome. Treatment of women. So basically, women have been systematically, people have accused Walmart systematically denying promotion to females, to not allowing females into management positions, and to having systemic discrimination going on there, as well as being a very anti-labor environment. So, but that's what we're talking about when you've got companies that are operating on margins. And guys, In terms of success, out of every $10 spent during the 2018 holiday season in the United States online, how many of those $10 went to Amazon?
Was it 6?
It's not that high yet, but it's 4.5. Is that a company you want to take on? Every $10 spent on the internet last Christmas, $4.50, one company. That's power, guys. So we left off, before we jump back into the exempt status stuff, any other comments or questions about Amazon or the modern labor environment? I want you to remember this. The statement that was being made by the Amazon employees, whether or not they got overwritten or trumped by their boss, I think it says something that a company, basically, people who work in a company that is so historically anti-labor, had the guts to make a statement about their feelings in the environment. That's definitely not a company that would hesitate to hire you or to fire you if they didn't like you, and yet these folks had the guts to do it. So I have a lot of respect for that. My point also in this class, although we talk a lot about labor and unions, we're talking about labor in general as part of this class as well. Okay, guys, we left off talking about what an exempt employee is. Who here can tell me in their own words, what's the difference between somebody who is hourly and exempt? What does exempt mean? It's a core concept. What if somebody's exempt? What are they exempt from? Yes.
Basic regulations for work, such as minimum wage or overtime or amount of hours.
Exactly right. So we're talking about people basically who are exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. The Fair Labor Standards Act, over 40 hours a week, entitles employees to what? Time and a half overtime. The other part of the Fair Labor Standards Act sets the 8-hour workday, sets the 40-hour work week. All these things are conditions of employment. If you're an exempt employee, you don't earn an hourly wage. What do you earn? You don't earn by the hour, you earn a what? A salary. So you get a salary no matter how many hours you work in most cases. Who here can give me an example of somebody who is exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act? What is a type of profession that is not hourly? Yes?
Doctors.
Yeah, absolutely. The doctors put in crazy hours. Anybody here have a family member who works in medicine, for example? If you ever know somebody who's a relative of a doctor, particularly somebody who does ER on-call work, they work crazy, crazy hours. What's another example of somebody who is exempt? Yes? Yes, teachers. We work weird hours. It wouldn't make sense to pay me by the hour. If I was getting paid by the hour, it would be a pittance of an hourly wage. What's somebody else who might be exempt? One more. Emily, what's somebody who might be exempt?
Do teachers get a paid salary?
We did mention teachers. Teachers are exempt. Who else might be exempt? I think it's somebody else who maybe wears a tie. Managers, CEOs, executives, people who have to put in non-traditional schedules and are not necessarily paid by the hour. So that's what we covered under the Fair Labor Standards Act. There's one other big exemption that we talked about has something to do with who you're related to. Who is that? Family businesses. If you work for the family farm, you're working as many hours as you need to bring in that harvest. Guys, here's the other part of it. There is a salary requirement. Right now, if you want to classify somebody as exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act, they have to make at least $679 pre-tax per week. If you put that into an annual construct, that means you've got to pay somebody at least $35,000 a year to make them salary. Guys, here's the thing. The old threshold, up until this year, was $455 a week. You can literally be classified as exempt for $23,660. What do you think about that, guys? Were people getting screwed by this proposition? Think about this. You get a job as a manager of a McDonald's, making $23,660 a year, $455 a week. Will somebody pull out their phone and do this calculation for me? Let's say, for example, it's an above-average work week, and it's not above the realm of possibility. We have worked a 60-hour week. Will somebody divide 455 by 60 for me?
7.58.
So basically what this says is under that wage, if you're the average manager who's probably pulling a 60-hour work week, and under the old threshold, you were barely making above minimum wage on an hourly construct to do all that work that would go on with a salary position. Can I have you do the math for me on the new threshold as well? Let's take for example, $679 and divide it by 60. What are we getting at that point?
$11.31.
So guys, what I'm here to tell you is that $35,000 is not a lot of money when you get into the management world. Here's the other thing we get into, guys. Let's say, for example, I have the option of paying somebody hourly or salary. If I'm paying somebody $11 or $12 an hour, overtime adds up very quickly, does it not? Yeah, if you got somebody who's working 20 hours a week, for example, over the normal schedule, somebody's working a 60-hour work week, it's cheaper for me to declare that they're exempt and make them a manager. That's when we get into other things that are classed as unfair labor practices. That's why companies love salary designations. Does this make sense, guys? And so if you've got somebody, for example, who on their hourly rate is making about $34,000 a year and they're working overtime all the time and going over that, it is in the employer's best interest to come up with a way to make them exempt. The trick is you got to make sure that you're classifying people correctly. Somebody who works on a factory floor, for example, and gets classified as exempt, you're probably breaking the law. Guys, I'm not going to read these to you, but these are companies, and by the way, because these are in the slides, it could show up on the test. I want you to be familiar with them. For example, if you are a non-retail business of $50,000 a year, you've got to pay people under the Fair Labor Standards Act. You've got to pay a minimum wage. You've got to pay overtime. I'm sorry, if you are somebody's managing one of those, you're exempt. If you are a newspaper, for example, if you're doing $200,000 in annual business, that's a dated concept because there aren't many newspapers anymore, you are covered under the Labor Management Relations Act. Private healthcare, all these things. Basically, we've got businesses that are covered with very specific exemptions. Some of the exemptions, for example, are things like agriculture. Some of the things, believe it or not, we have some really weird exemptions too. Movie theaters. People who used to operate projectors were exempt. People who worked in radio were exempt. Some other folks, for example, were exempt based on very specific parts of the law. The bottom line is almost everybody is covered under the National Labor Relations Board and the National Labor Relations Act, which establishes a minimum wage and a 40-hour work week. Now, some of these folks have their own agreements and their own specific laws that may even be more strict. For example, if you work for the railroad or you work for trucking industry, you have certain designations about how many hours in a row you're allowed to work. Why is that? Yes.
When it comes to like trucking, railroad, if you have people operating beyond a reasonable amount of time, they fall asleep on the job.
Exactly right. It's a public safety issue. So, for example, how many of you regularly, I know athletes, you guys do, how many of you regularly do very long bus trips? What happens with the drivers? Do they have to swap drivers out? They have to get a night's sleep, all these things? And it's because of public safety requirements. So there are people who have even more intense requirements for things like downtime than even the normal working population has. So, guys, we're going to stop there for a second. I've been going for a good 20 minutes. We're taking our first breather. And I would like a question or a comment from somewhere in the room. Sir?
After like hearing a little like her talk the other day.
Yeah.
Like, do you think you're gonna make any like significant lifestyle changes for yourself personally?
You know, that's an excellent question. Corey, I'm cheap. I don't mind saying that. I'm very cheap. Like I'm one of these people, I like having money in the bank. I don't like spending stuff that I don't need. I will debate about a new pair of shoes for 2 months before I'll buy them because I got to justify it to myself. I wish I could, wish other people who lived in my house had the same kind of ethics in terms of finance. And I think my goal will be, after hearing that speech, to figure out how I can reopen the dialogue with other people who are not myself regarding the way that maybe they approach their finances. Is that an okay response to that question? What about you? Did it change the way you thought about anything? Are you cheap or are you a big spender?
I'm cheap, but I like that for the time. So, if it comes to doing this or staying in to save money, I'm gonna do this more than likely, and that's my problem. But I don't know, like I feel like the way she was talking, it kind of like made me seem like life is gonna be miserable. Like that's kind of what I got from it.
Wow. So
not that life is gonna be miserable, but like she was like, instead of going out to drinks with your friends, she would just like stay in. I think she should never do that.
I think she takes it to an extreme, though.
Yeah.
Here's what I'll say, man. Life's too cheap. Life's too short for bad beer.
That's what I'm saying.
And it's like you got to have some things in life you enjoy. And so I think she takes it to an extreme. I'm sorry, man, and I'm cheap, and I'm going to own more than 4 outfits to wear to work.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So I agree with you. But that being said, I'm going to drive this car till it doesn't run anymore. So, other questions or comments? Questions or comments or thoughts about anything? Ma'am?
Do you think that Amazon's still going to be around in 2040? Do you think like their problems are kind of going to just pop?
That's a really great question because, if we look back at the beginnings of Amazon, for the first 10 to 12 years they were around, they didn't turn a profit. And so that defies conventional wisdom. The company isn't making money, how do they stay? And we think about all these, I'm going to name a company here, and you guys tell me, are they making a profit or not? Uber. No, they're not making a profit yet. Lyft. They're not making a profit. You list all these tech startup companies, and none of them are making a profit yet. So how are they going to make that in the long run? I think Amazon probably will be around, but I think they're going to be around in a different way than they are now. This is something, and my MIS guys in here will know what I'm talking about. Amazon's one of the biggest providers of internet hosting in the world. Like, people's websites live on Amazon, including, get this, the United States government. Like, I don't know if you guys remember this, right when the Affordable Care Act rolled out, you remember how all the servers were crashing, and the government got a bad rap for their health care. They ended up using Amazon to bail them out in terms of giving them excess capacity. So I think we're going to see Amazon more in our overall commerce infrastructure, more than just selling books and action figures, So what do you think? Do you think they'll be around?
I don't know. I feel like they're going to kind of get out of it. I don't know, because they've done so much innovation. Like, they were just a book company, and then they got Kindle, and then they kind of, like, progressed. But
Here's the thing. In this economy, it's okay to say I don't know, because who does? I mean, the things that we used to count as stalwarts of industry, things that we always would have around. I mean, back in 2008, when GM went bankrupt, okay, now I know I'm a Gen Xer and you guys are Gen Z, but GM, there used to be a cliche everybody used to say, and that was, what's good for GM is good for the government. What's good for GM is good for the country. Because GM was such a big employer and big part of our American culture. And to actually experience a moment in time where it came this close to them not existing anymore, that's a huge deal. And I think we're going to see more seismic shifts like that in our economy, too. Keep in mind, guys, we're the #1 GDP in the world right now. By the way, what does GDP stand for? Anybody know? You got it. We're #1. Who's #2? Any guesses? China. China leapfrogged Japan 5 years ago. Our GDP is right around 20 trillion. Theirs is right around 11 or 12 now. So you guys may live to see a time when the United States is no longer the most powerful financial country in the world, and China is. And so that changes leverage, that changes the way we work. As a matter of national pride, I'd love it if that didn't happen, but it may be the new reality. And so anything's up for debate at this point. And all that stuff and these conditions affect how we are employed and how people are employed too. Does that make sense? You guys are asking good questions today. Guys, in terms of, because we're still talking about the Labor Management Relations Act, what the Labor Management Relations Act also did was give us some kind of rules of conduct and some criteria, for example. Something that was called concerted activity means that you as employees, even if you're not in a union, have the right to have your voices heard. If 2 or more people want to get together and talk about a problem to management, that's called concerted activity, and it is permissible. You don't have to be a member of a union to get together with somebody else in your company to be able to say, we don't like the way this is going, we have a legitimate concern. In the same way, for example, several people from a class may come to an instructor and say, that question on the exam didn't make any sense, can we talk about this? Employees are allowed to do this as well. Now, what this has to be done is in a way that's reasonable, and it has to be lawful. There's a difference between several employees going to the manager's office and saying, we're not happy with conditions, versus cornering somebody in the bathroom and physically threatening them if something doesn't change. So that's what we talk about when we refer to using lawful means. So what you should remember is that basically the LRMA allows employees to come together and talk about this stuff. In terms of concerted activity, a person who is working alone, this is called the interborough doctrine. If you are a member of a collective bargaining agreement, if you are covered by a union, however, somebody who is acting as an individual is allowed to do so and represent others if they are backing up a collective bargaining agreement. So let's take all that mumbo jumbo and break it down into common terms. Concerted activity is on the other end of the spectrum. We're in a non-union shop or a union shop. We're coming together to talk about our concerns with management. We represent ourselves, these two people. If we are in a union, one person can go and express agreements and be representing the entire union. Do you see the difference between the two? That makes sense. It's a very it's a splitting hair kind of thing, but the interborough doctrine, I would write this down. The interborough doctrine means that one person can be considered to represent the union if they are a member of that union. So one person can be considered to be concerted effort if they are a member of a union. Make sense, guys? Okay. All right, guys, in terms of unfair labor practices, when we start talking about unfair labor practices, we can be talking about things such as, for example, if you guys are all members of a labor union and you've done nothing wrong and you're honoring the terms of your collective bargaining agreement and I decide to lock you out of my factory, I could be involved in an unfair labor practice. You guys have lived up to your end of the agreement. I've lived up to mine. If I decide to lock you out for no good reason, that could be an unfair labor practice. On the same token, if you guys have an unscheduled strike that does not fit within the terms of your collective bargaining agreement, if you got a no strike clause and you go on strike, that could also be considered an unfair labor practice. So in terms of how this works, if we're taking this to court, if we want to accuse our employer of an unfair labor practice, the party who has the grievance, whether it is the union or whether it is the employer, basically gets their lawyer and they go to the general counsel and they challenge the action. In other words, they got locked out. I'm part of the union. We're challenging this lockout. The person who is accused of wrongdoing is called the respondent. This person is responsible to basically say, they're responsible to prove wrong that no, this isn't happening. So I'm being accused of the action. At this point, merit means, is there a reason why we should even consider this in a court of law? Is this a legit concern or not? Is there merit to the charge? And then finally, this stuff is presided over by somebody referred to as an administrative law judge. So the charging party is the person saying foul. There's something wrong here. The respondent is the person who's being accused. Merit is there actual merit to the case? Is there a reason why we're talking about this? And finally, the administrative law judge is the person who's going to hear the arguments. So guys, I printed copies of this out. I'll be bringing these to you next class for us to be able to really talk through how an unfair labor practice procedure. We're actually going to do that as an exercise in class. And I know this is a little hard to read. But guys, here's the way it works. If you've got your book, you can feel free to follow along with me. When there's a charge, somebody basically is saying there's something wrong going on here. We've got an unfair labor practice. It can be the employer or the employee who's making the determination. There's an investigation basically at that point, and a couple of things can happen when you have an investigation. Think about CSI. Anybody here like watching CSI, for example? It's the same kind of thing. The investigation, a couple of things can happen. If it's a minor complaint, if there's an investigation, for example, that we're not getting enough time to don our safety apparatus before we go into the coal mine, that could be resolved by what we refer to as a complaint and answer. In other words, the complaint gets registered with the authorities, the folks who are responsible respond, it gets fixed. Well, if that doesn't happen, we can also get an injunction. When the investigation starts, we can also get an injunction. Here's what an injunction means, guys. It's somebody in a court of law is saying we need to cease and desist specific action at a point in time. Let's apply this. So let's say that there was a charge that the mine in Upper Massey Big Branch was contaminated. There's methane that's coming through the tunnels. It's an unsafe condition. There's an investigation, and they determine, well, yes, there is. There is methane here. If somebody goes into those mines, there's going to be a bad problem. Somebody's going to get hurt. That could result in an immediate injunction that basically says you've got to stop this activity right now. If the concern is serious but not as serious, for example, if we have an investigation and there's a complaint and answer period, that could also lead to an injunction where somebody is saying we need to stop this activity. If it is not something that's life and death, for example, once there's a complaint, it goes through the legal system. We'll talk about every step of this in one of the upcoming classes. We can go to a hearing. We can go down to what we refer to as a remedial order. What that means is that a judge has taken a chance to listen to the case, and they've made an order that either you fix it, which is a remedial order. A dismissal means there's no merit to the case. The case is over. Or we can go to what we refer to as an other disposition, which could mean it's heading up to another layer of court. Finally, if we do get a remedial order, the code enforcement review could mean that the laws that we currently had in place to protect people weren't working well, they need to be revised. One of the other things that can also happen right from the get-go, from the investigation, there could be also the decision that this complaint was of questionable merit, and people who have issued the complaint can make the decision to withdraw the complaint as well. This is a very complicated slide, and it's covering a lot of what we're going to be discussing about the rest of the semester. We're going to be going through it step by step on Monday. The point being about this, that an unfair labor practice is a very ambiguous concept and oftentimes ends up in court. You can't always predict what's going to come out which direction. So don't be intimidated by this. Don't be intimidated by all this verbiage. We're going to walk it through on Monday. Are there questions about this slide? I know this, guys, I always agree with being honest with you guys. This part of things, the procedural part and understanding it, is the less exciting part of labor and management stuff, but it's necessary because if we don't have courts, if we don't have procedures, then all the laws in the world mean nothing, and all the organizations that we join, unions or otherwise, mean nothing without this component. Questions? Well, let's continue then, guys. In terms of unfair labor practice cases, now we're going to be going back to that diagram, but there's a difference between what we refer to as routine and lead cases. Routine means somebody did something that was against the rules, but it happens sometimes. So an unfair labor practice might be, for example, if we've got people who are not able to get in, let's say we're in a mine, for example. People who work in the mines have to do what they refer to as donning and doffing. Donning means putting on. Doffing means taking off. You're donning protective apparatus. You're going into a coal mine, you got breathing apparatus, you've got safety apparatus. It takes you a couple minutes to get that stuff on. If you're using breathing apparatus, for example, you got to check your oxygen. You got to make sure all these things are working. Doffing means at the end of the shift, you've got to wash off, you've got to get all these chemicals off of you. If our employer, for example, wasn't making the facilities available with adequate time for us to get our gear on and off, that would be a routine case. This is an unfair labor practice. You got to give people the chance to get in and out. Something that's a lead case is something that is an issue that maybe is not routine or that we haven't heard before. Let me give you an example. Anybody who had my e-commerce class may remember this. There's a restaurant in California that actually has a robot that makes hamburgers. The robot's name is Flippy. Literally, it's a robot that flips hamburgers and makes cheeseburgers. People are still working there. They're still putting them in the buns and serving them to customers. But let's say Flippy, this robot, ends up creating a scenario when you walk by it, it almost hits you every time you walk by it, this big metal arm. That would be an example of a lead case because nobody's really ever had to deal with labor law involving giant robotic arms making hamburgers before. So that would be an example of a lead case. By the way, guys, a big reason we're seeing all this automation right now has to do with the 3% unemployment rate. Why is that, guys? Why are we seeing so much of this automation come in the current environment? What do you think? Yeah.
Human labor isn't cheap since there's not a lot of supply.
Exactly right. Supply and demand. And guys, we're seeing really bizarre things come up. One of the ones I've shown in class before, may show it in this class too, out of novelty. In Japan, for example, they're running out of people to work in nursing homes. Guys, check this out. In Japan, now when I say this, I don't mean it as a negative comment, it's just an observation. Japan has a very strong bias against letting people who are not from Japan migrate to Japan. They don't want people who are not from Japan living in Japan. So they have very tight control over visas. So in other words, low-wage workers who would typically come from other countries to move into Japan aren't really allowed to be there. As a result, they're running out of people to work in nursing homes. Japan is actually developing robots at this point whose entire purpose is going to be to take care of people in nursing homes. This thing is called Robear, and I'm not kidding. They're developing giant robot teddy bears that can lift 300 pounds because they thought that the robot bear would be less intimidating than a humanoid-looking robot. Anybody's working with adults with dementia, you're going to have to get back to me and let me know if a giant robot teddy bear is going to be any less intimidating. But that's what they're working on. So that would be an example of a unique case as well. In terms of the cease and desist orders, what that means, for example, if we've got an unfair labor practice that is so bad, somebody's life is at stake, or we're committing a financial crime, you can issue a cease and desist order. And what that basically means, okay, Massey Coal Mine, right now, if you put more people into this mine, they're going to get killed because of the safety conditions. Cease and desist immediately. Or conversely, you mine workers are throwing metal spikes on the road and popping tires. This is not good. You're going to result in the death of a truck driver. You might get a cease and desist there. You might be actually branching into criminal activity at that point, but cease and desist will cover part of it. I would assume that throwing metal spikes intentionally on the road with the purpose of popping tires does constitute criminal activity. And then we also can get what we refer to as affirmative relief, and that means what will make people whole after these problems. If you got people who were fired unfairly, you could have to reinstate them. By the way, with back pay and wages. If you weren't paying somebody, you might have to give them back pay and wages. If you unfairly terminated somebody who was a member of a collective bargaining agreement, you might have to give them back their seniority too. So it all comes down to the idea of what is going to make people whole. This is one I think is really interesting too. The certification of the bargaining representative. Here's what that means, guys. Let's say we determine that people were coerced into joining a labor union. If people in the company were bullying other people to get them to sign up for the union, that could be considered an unfair labor practice, and the remedy might be that we're going to decertify the union in that case. So, guys, in terms of the courts themselves, the court has to back up the decision if it means it's fitting within the letters of intent of the LMRA, so the Labor Management Relations Act. If you've got evidence and you're backing up what the law was supposed to protect, keep in mind, we always go back to this. The Labor Management Relations Act was meant to make working conditions acceptable for people. Guys, we're gonna do this right here. It's 10:42, and it's Friday, and it's sunny, and I see that look on all of your faces. If one person will give me one good question, we can end class for today. One good question. Corey, you're the man.
Hypothetically speaking, if you were invited on the View, would you buy a new outfit, or would you wear the same outfit that you?
Oh, I'd buy a new outfit. I'd have somebody who would be honest with me, say, will you help me pick something where I won't look like a complete chump in front of 5 million people? And I'd listen to them, because I think most of the time 46-year-old men aren't good at picking out their own clothes. So I would listen to somebody else. How about that?
Yes.
All right, guys, have a wonderful day. Good luck if you're competing this weekend.